It started like any other night, the hum of the ceiling fan above me, the soft glow of the clock on the nightstand, reading 2:34 a.m., in the familiar creak of floorboards in the hallway, except tonight, that creak was too deliberate, too careful. My eyes snapped open and is strained to hear more footsteps, faint, almost cautious, as if someone were trying not to wake me. "Olivia," I called out, groggy, but there was no answer, just the sound of the steps fading toward the living room. For a moment I considered ignoring it. Maybe she couldn't sleep and decided to tidy up. It wouldn't be the first time, but something didn't feel right. There was a tension in the air, a subtle shift that made my instincts bristle. I got up quietly, careful not to make a sound, and patted down the hall. The faint light from her phone illuminated her silhouette as she crouched over something on the coffee table. She was so engrossed she didn't notice me standing there. "Olivia," I said again, my voice firmer this time. She jumped, clutching her phone to her chest like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out James. "You scared me," she said, forcing a laugh. I couldn't sleep, so you what I asked, crossing my arms. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an excuse. I just needed some air, thought I'd sit out here for a bit. I stared at her for a moment, trying to read her expression. She looked calm enough, but there was something in her tone, a hesitation that set my nerves on edge. Still, I nodded and let it go. "All right, don't stay up too late the next morning?" I woke to an alert on my phone, a $122,000 charge for a designer handbag. I frowned, swiping through more notifications. First-class tickets to Paris, a 5-star hotel reservation, and high-end jewelry, all within hours of each other. My stomach dropped. I knew Olivia had access to my card, but these purchases were excessive, out of character. My first thought was that the card had been stolen, but a sinking feeling told me otherwise. I scrolled further, piecing together the timeline. These weren't random charges, they were deliberate, calculated, and then it hit me the night before her, sneaking around her nervous demeanor. The truth clicked into place with a clarity that made my chest tighten. Olivia had copied my card details while I slept. The thought made me blood run cold. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or an oversight. It was deliberate betrayal. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for years, had stolen from me. I stared at the list of charges, the totaler, climbing into the tens of thousands, and felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more information. I combed through my emails and financial alerts, cross-referencing the transactions each purchase painted. Clearer picture, luxury, goods, extravagant travel plans, indulgences meant for someone who had no intention of being caught by midday. I was in full detective mode. I checked the security cameras, reviewing footage of her leaving the house early. That morning she'd been careful, wearing a scarf and sunglasses, but it was her. I could see it in her posture, the way she moved. The realization stung. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, this was premeditated. And if the purchases were any indication, Olivia had no intention of stopping when she came home that evening. I acted normal. We had dinner together, exchanged pleasantries, and talked about her day. As if nothing had changed, but inside, I was a storm waiting to break. I watched her carefully, noticing the little things I'd overlooked before, the way she avoided eye contact, the way her laughter felt forced. She was hiding something, and now I knew exactly what it was that night. As she slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than Thelast. Why had she done it? What had I missed? Was this about money? Or was it something deeper, a crack in our marriage I hadn't seen until now? But beneath the questions was a simmering resolve. Olivia thought she was clever that she'd gotten away with it, but she had underestimated me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I sat in my office, the morning sunlight streaming through the blinds, reflecting off the untouched coffee on my desk. In front of me was the credit card statement, or rather the damning list of charges Olivia had racked up in less than a day, designer. Bags first, class tickets, 5-star hotels, the grand total had ballooned to an obscene amount, and yet I wasn't panicking. No, I was calm, too calm, because I knew something Olivia didn't. The card she'd so carefully stolen wasn't exactly what it seemed. You see, I've spent years working in fraud detection. It's my job to anticipate deception, to think like someone who's trying to get away with the unthinkable. That's why I created the dummy card, an account tied directly to an intricate monitoring system, designed to flag unusual transactions and alert the necessary authorities. It was a tool I used to bait and track highly fraudsters. Never in my wildest dreams did I think it would ensnare my own wife. As I stared at the statement, my phone buzzed. With a familiar notification, another charge for $200 for a diamond bracelet. The tracking software flagged the location immediately, a boutique in Paris. I leaned back in my chair, the reality sinking in. Olivia was already on Route Paris, the city of lights, romance and betrayal. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an old friend, Marcus, who worked security at the airport. "Hey, James saw Olivia at the terminal this morning. She was with some guy, looked cozy. Boarding for Paris, thought you should." No, I stared at the message, my stomach tightening. A man, of course there was. The purchases, the extravagant getaway. It wasn't just about indulgence. She wasn't escaping alone. She was running with him. I didn't respond to Marcus right away. Instead, I opened the tracking dashboard on my laptop. Every transaction Olivia made was mapped out in real-time: restaurants, boutiques, hotels. It wasn't just a trail of her movements, it was a timeline of her betrayal. Each charge another stab in the back. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay composed. Anger wouldn't help me, no. Precision would. Patience would. This wasn't the time for rash decisions. It was the time to let her dig her own grave. As the hours passed, the notifications kept rolling in. $500 dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, a $77,000 suite at a luxury hotel, tickets to a private wine. Tasting each transaction painted a picture of indulgence, of a life she was funding with the card she thought was her golden ticket. But I knew better. Every dollar she spent was another brick in the case building against her. The fraud detection team was already on high alert, monitoring every move. Federal authorities had been notified, and the web was tightening around her with every passing moment. By the end of the day, I'd pieced together enough to confirm the full extent of her betrayal. Olivia wasn't just stealing from me, she was flaunting it. She crossed a line I never thought she'd even approach, and now there was no coming back. That evening I sat in the living room staring at the empty space where Olivia usually sat. The house felt quieter, colder. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, and I wondered, was any of it real? Had it all been a facade, a game she'd been playing while I was none the wiser? My phone buzzed again, another notification. This time it was a booking for a private yacht in Monaco. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of amusement, but disbelief. She was living a fantasy. A life funded by stolen money, oblivious to the consequences hurtling toward her. And then a new thought crossed my mind. What would she do when the house of cards came crashing down, when she realized the life she tried to steal was nothing more than An illusion, would she blame me? Would she try to manipulate her way out of it? I set my phone down and leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees. There was no point in wondering. The truth was already in motion, and Olivia was walking straight into the trap she'd set for herself. All I had to do was wait. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Olivia thought she'd won, that she was living the high life, while I sat at home, clueless. But she had underestimated me. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I picked up my phone and replied to Marcus's text. Thanks for the heads up. Let me know if you hear anything else. The crisp Parisian air must have felt intoxicating to Olivia as she stepped off the plane. She had the perfect companion by her side, Mark, the man she'd been secretly seeing for months. Together they walked through the Charles de Gaulle terminal, oblivious to the storm brewing back home. Their destination, a world of luxury, indulgence, and betrayal, all funded by the card she thought was her ticket to freedom from my office. Thousands of miles away, I watched it all unfold. In real time, every EXT extravagant charge, every decadent meal, every lavish purchase appeared on my screen like a breadcrumb trail of deceit. Olivia might have thought she was living her dream, but to me, it was a meticulously documented case building itself against her. Their first stop was a luxury boutique in the heart of Paris, a $112 handbag, a $15,000 custom suit for Mark, and accessories worth more than most people's annual salary. The receipts told the story of their arrogance, their belief that they were untouchable. Each swipe of the card was another nail in the coffin, and I let them hammer away, knowing that every detail was being flagged and recorded. The notifications came faster than I could read them. Dinner at a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant, $4, $500 a private tour of the Louvre after hours, $88,000. It was almost laughable how brazen they were. They weren't just spending money, they were flaunting it, parading through the city as if the world owed them everything for a week, imitated their escapades. From Paris to Monaco, they left a trail of indulgence wherever they went. Private yachts, designer jewelry, champagne flowing like watermark, played the role of the charming accomplice. His arm draped around Olivia as they strolled through the streets of Monte Carlo, posing for photos and reveling in their temporary paradise. But even paradise has its limits. What Olivia didn't realize was that her fantasy was being dismantled with every transaction. The dummy card wasn't just a tool for monitoring. It was a net tightening around her and Mark. With every swipe, the authorities were already involved, and the case was growing stronger by the hour. I'd spoken with the fraud detection team and federal investigators, ensuring that every detail was meticulously documented. Olivia and Mark thought they were untouchable, but the reality was far different. By the 5th day, their spree took a darker turn. The charges became erratic, desperate. A $30,000 withdrawal from an ATM in Monaco, likely to fund something they couldn't charge. To the cart, a rushed booking for a private jet back to Paris. It was clear that the cracks were starting to show. Maybe they'd sensed something was off, or maybe their funds were running dry. Either way, their facade was beginning to crumble. On the 7th day, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A booking for a suite at the Ritz in Paris, the pinnacle of their arrogance. It was there that Olivia's illusion of control would come crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the charge for the rights confirmed. My phone buzzed with a message from the investigators. "We're ready to move. Just say the word." I thought about it for a moment. letting the weight of the situation settle over. Me, Olivia, had chosen this path. She'd made the decisions that led her here, and now she would face the consequences. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph, just a cold, clinical resolve. See this through, do it, I replied, as the authorities prepared to act. I sat in my office reflecting on everything that had brought us to this point. The betrayal, the lies, the arrogance. It all seemed so surreal. Olivia had taken everything we built together and burned it to the ground for the sake of our fleeting fantasy. And now that fantasy was about to end, the final notification came late that night, a message from the investigators. They're in custody. I exhaled slowly, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was the ending she'd earned. The week-long European adventure was over, and the fallout was just beginning. Olivia returned home like a queen returning from a triumphant conquest. Her heels clicked confidently on the marble floor of the entryway, her arms loaded with designer shop bags and a smug smile plastered across her face. The faint scent of expensive perfume trailed her, a bold statement of her escapades. She had no idea. I was waiting for her, watching us. She sauntered into the living room like she owned the place. Well, I said, leaning casually against the doorway, look who's back. She glanced at me briefly, her smile not faltering for a second. Oh, James, she said breezily, as if she'd merely been out for a routine shopping trip. I hope you don't mind, but I treated myself to a few things while I was away. Treated yourself? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. That's one way to put it. She set the bags down and began pulling out the spoils of her so-called treatment. A sequin dress, a diamond-studded watch, a leather bag that likely cost more than our monthly mortgage. Each item was more extravagant than the last, and she flaunted them with a deliberate nonchalance, as if daring me to object. Thank you for the upgrade, she said with a smirk, holding up the watch for me to admire. You've outdone yourself this time. I stared at her, a mix of disbelief and amusement bubbling just beneath the surface. She genuinely thought she'd gotten away with it, that her little escapade had gone unnoticed. The audacity was almost admirable, almost. You're welcome, I replied evenly, playing along for now, though I must admit I wasn't expecting you to be so bold. Her laugh was light, almost mocking. Bold, please, I deserve a little indulgence after everything, don't you think? Oh, absolutely, I said, nodding. You've certainly been indulging yourself. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing the shift in my tone, but the moment passed, and she resumed, unpacking her treasure, shattering about the luxurious hotels, the exclusive party, and the breathtaking views she'd enjoyed. I let her talk, let her bask in her arrogance. The more she revealed, the tighter the new around her neck became. Every detail she shared added another layer to the case I'd been building, another thread in the web sheet. Spun around herself when she finally finished, she turned to me with a self-satisfied smile. So what do you think? She asked, gesturing to the display of extravagance spread across the room. Not bad for a little getaway, huh? I chuckled, shaking my head. Not bad at all, I said. In fact, it's quite impressive. Her smile widened, clearly mistaking my tone for approval. I knew you'd understand, she said. Stepping closer, you've always been so generous. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. Oh, I understand, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand, stopping her. Let her not ruin the moment, I said, my voice calm. You've had a long trip. Why don't you take some time to relax? We can talk about everything tomorrow. She hesitated, clearly unsure of what to make of my response. But in the end, her arrogance out. She nodded, picked up her bags and headed upstairs, her heels clicking against the steps as I watched her go. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She thought she'd won, that she'd fooled me, but she had no idea what was coming. The house of cards she built was about to collapse, and when it did, there would be no escaping the fallout. For now, I'd let her enjoy her victory lap tomorrow. The real game would begin the morning after Olivia's grand return. I sat at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee waiting for her to come downstairs. The faint sound of her footsteps on the staircase signaled her arrival, and I took a deep breath, preparing for the moment I'd been building toward. She entered the kitchen with her usual air of confidence, dressed impeccably, as though she were ready to attend a high society brunch. Her freshly manicured nails caught the sunlight streaming through the window, a subtle reminder of her extravagance. "Good morning," she said with a smile, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You're up early." "Good morning," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I thought we could talk." She paused, her hand hovering over the sugar bowl. "Talk about what?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Why don't you sit down?" Her smile faltered slightly, but she complied, taking a seat with her coffee in hand. "All right, James, what's on your mind?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her for a moment. "I've been thinking about your trip." I began. "It sounds like you had quite the adventure." Her smile returned, this time with a hint of smugness. "It was wonderful," she said, leaning forward. "The shopping, the food, the views, truly unforgettable." I nodded. "Unforgettable indeed." Then, unable to hold it in any longer, I let out a laugh, not Asmal chuckle, but a full-bodied laugh that startled her. "What's so funny?" she asked, her tone tinged with irritation. "Oh, Olivia," I said, shaking my head. "You really thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Her expression shifted, confusion replacing her smugness. "Get away with what, James?" "What are you talking about?" I reached for my phone and pulled up the tracking dashboard. Turning it to face her, the screen displayed every transaction she'd made, each one flagged and documented. "You've been busy," I said, my voice calm. "Paris, Monaco, private yachts, designer, boutiques, it's quite the list." Her face paled as she stared at the screen. I can explain," she stammered. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, leaning forward. "But let me save you the trouble. That card you used, it's not what you think it is. It's a dummy card tied directly to my fraud detection system. Every purchase you made was flagged, tracked, and reported in real time. Hermouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, her usual confidence completely evaporated." "James, I didn't know. I thought you'd outsmarted me," I said, cutting her off. "You thought you could steal from me, mock me, and get away with it. But you underestimated me." "Olivia, you always have." Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. This wasn't the time for pity or forgiveness. "And Mark," I continued, my voice growing colder, "your little partner in crime, HEK, part of the case now too. Every charge you made together only strengthened the evidence against both of you." Her hands trembled as she placed her coffee cup on the table. "James, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wasn't thinking you weren't thinking," I repeated, my tone sharp. "No, Olivia, you were thinking about yourself, about how much you could take before I noticed, but now it's over." She reached across theatable, her voice desperate. "James, I'm sorry, I'll make it right. Please, just give me a chance to fix this." I pulled my hand back, shaking my head. "It's out of my hands now," I said. "The authorities have everything they need. They'll be here soon to sort this out." The colour drained from her face entirely. "The authorities?" she whispered. "That's right," I said. "Standing up. You wanted to play this game, Olivia. Now you get to deal with the consequences." As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to sit in stunned silence, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in her downfall, no satisfaction in her despair, but there was relief that the truth was finally out, that I could begin to move on from the web of lies she'd spun around us. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The knock on the door was sharp and precise, echoing through the house like a harbinger of judgment. Olivia froze, and, in the living room, her hands gripping the edges of the couch as though it might anchor her to some semblance of reality. I stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her unravel James. She whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the door and opened it, revealing two federal agents. They were dressed in crisp suits, their expression stern but professional. "Mr. James Carter," one of them asked. I nodded. "That's me, come in." They stepped inside, their presence commanding the room. Olivia shrank back as their eyes landed on her. "Mrs. Olivia Carter," the lead agent said, his tone formal. She didn't respond at first, her lips trembling. As she glanced at me for help when I didn't offer any, she nodded weakly. "Why, yes, that's me. We're here to inform you that you're under arrest for fraudulent use of financial information, unauthorized transactions, conspiracy to commit fraud." The agent continued, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "No," Olivia cried, backing away. "There must be some mistake, James, please. Tell them this isn't what it looks like." I remained silent, my expression unreadable. Her "please" echoed in the room, but they fell on deaf ears. The agents moved toward her, one gently but firmly, taking her arm to guide her toward the door. "James," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought the card was a gift. I didn't know it was a dummy account, you have to believe." "Me?" I shook my head, slowly, my voice calm but cold. "Olivia, you knew exactly what you were doing. You copied my card while I was asleep, planned your little getaway, and spent weeks living a lie. This is just the natural consequence of your choices." Her knees buckled, and the agents had to hold her up as they guided her toward the door. She continued to plead, her voice growing more desperate with each step. "Please, James, don't let them take me. I'll make it right. I swear. I'll pay back everything. Just give me another chance." I followed them to the doorway, watching. As they led her outside, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, their curious eyes peeking from behind curtains and front porches. Olivia's sobs filled the air, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor of the agents. Before they placed her in the back of their car, she turned to look at me one last time. Her makeup was smudged, her face pale, and her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry." I held her gaze for a moment, then turned away without a word. The sound of the sea door closing behind her felt like the final punctuation mark on a chapter I'd never expected to write as the car pulled away. I stood on the porch, watching it disappear. Down the street, the neighbors began to retreat, their curiosity sated, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the first time in weeks. The house felt quiet, peaceful inside. I sat down on the couch and stared at the space Olivia had occupied just moments ago. Her betrayal had shattered the life we built together, but in its place I felt a strange sense of clarity. The storm had passed, and now it was time to rebuild. The doorbell rang again, and I opened it to find one of the agents standing there. He handed me a card with a phone number on it. "If you have any further questions or need to provide additional information, give us a call," he said. "Thank you," I replied. Taking the card, he nodded and left, leaving me to close the door and lean against it. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, but beneath it I felt a sense of freedom. Olivia's actions had hurt me deeply, but they had also revealed the truth, a truth I could no longer ignore. As I stood there, I realized that this wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the beginning of something new, a chance to reclaim my life, to move forward without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take that step. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. By the time the news broke about Olivia's arrest, it was as though a dam had burst, releasing a torrent of judgment and disdain in our social circles. Whispers turned to headlines, and headlines turned into public scorn. Her once polished and envied reputation was now the subject of ridicule and condemnation. Friends who'd once admired her for her charm and poise now turned their backs, distancing themselves as though her betrayal might somehow taint them. Invitations to events dried up, and her name was quietly removed from the committees and organizations she had once championed. Even her closest confidant were left speechless, unsure how to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one exposed by her actions. Her lover, Mark, was the first to abandon her. The he realized the legal storm he'd walked into. He disappeared without a trace, leaving Olivia to face the consequences alone. It was most poetic. Really, the man she'd chosen over me, the Oni she'd risked everything for, had vanished like a ghost at the first sign of trouble at work. The ramifications were equally severe. Olivia's employer, upon learning of her arrest, issued a statement distancing the company from her actions they conducted. An internal review to ensure no misconduct had occurred on their premises. The findings cleared the company, but left Olivia with no professional safety net. She was fired at immediately, her career in tatters. Meanwhile, I found myself inundated with messages and calls, somewhere from friends offering support and sympathy, while others were from curious acquaintances fishing for details. I answered only the ones I felt obligated to, keeping my responses short and factual. The last thing I wanted was to fan the flames of gossip. The most challenging part of the fallout, however, wasn't the public spectacle. It was the private aftermath, the most moments when I was alone with my thoughts, grappling with the enormity of what had happened. Despite everything, there was a part of me that mourned the loss of what we'd once had. I couldn't help but replay memories of happier times, wondering how we had arrived at this point. But amidst the sorrow, there was also a sense of vindication. Olivia's actions had finally caught up to her. And the truth was, out in the open, there was no more hiding, no more manipulation. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace. Olivia tried to reach out from the legal mess she was now embroiled in. Letters arrived at my door, each one filled with pleas for forgiveness and promises to make things right. I read them all, not because I was considering reconciliation, but because I needed to understand her mindset. The words felt hollow, her apologies tainted by desperation, rather than genuine remorse. Her legal battle was grueling. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attempts to shift blame onto Mark or even me fell flat in the face of documented proof. Her lawyers negotiated a plea deal, sparing her from significant jail time but leaving her with a mountain of restitution to pay and a tarnished record that would follow her for the rest of her life in the quiet moments. I thought about what her downfall meant for me. It was a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an odd sense of closure. I hadn't wanted this ending, but it was the one we'd arrived at, and I knew I had to accept it. The world moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded, replaced by new scandals and stories. Olivia's name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart, and for me, life began to settle into a new normal. I redecorated the house removing traces of her presence and replacing them with things that brought me comfort and joy. I connected with old friends, spent time with family, and began to focus on myself for the first time in years. The fallout was painful, but it was also freeing a chance to rebuild, without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. In the end, the fallout wasn't just about Olivia. It was about me reclaiming my life, finding strength in the ruins, and taking the first steps toward a brighter future. The weeks following the fallout felt like a blur. While Olivia's life unraveled in public view, I found myself navigating the aftermath, and in a quieter, more personal way, I'd spent so much time focusing on her betrayal that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next for me. But now, as the dust began to settle, I realized it was time to rebuild. Not just the life she had fractured, but my sense of self finalizing. The divorce was the first major step. The proceedings were straightforward thanks, in part, to Olivia's legal troubles. She had little room to argue or negotiate, and the judge saw through attempt at manipulation. The papers were signed, the assets divided, and just like that, the chapter of our marriage was officially closed. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt an unexpected lightness. The weight of years of mistrust, doubt, and deceit seemed to lift from my shoulders. I wasn't just free of Olivia, I was free of the person I'd become in her shadow, the man who ignored red flags, who made excuses, holeless, himself trying to hold on to something that wasn't real. It was time to rediscover who I was without her. It threw myself into projects I put off for years. The house, once a shared space, filled with memories of us, became my personal canvas. I redecorated, rearranged, and replaced each change, a symbolic act of reclaiming my space. The living room lost its cold, minimalist decor and was transformed into a warm, inviting sanctuary. The bedroom was stripped of its sterile whites and replaced with bold colors that reflected my newfound confidence. Outside the house, I began reconnecting with friends and family. Relationships that had been neglected during my marriage now became my anchors. Friday nights turned into game nights with old friends. Sunday afternoons were spent with my parents, and my phone buzzed constantly with messages from people who genuinely cared about me. Their support was a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. Work, too, became a source of with Olivia's betrayal. No longer consuming my thoughts, I threw myself into my career with a renewed focus. Projects that had once felt like a grind now felt like opportunities. I took on challenges I would have shied away from before, and my efforts didn't go unnoticed. Promotions, recognition, and new opportunities came my way, each one a testament to my determination to move forward. But the turning point wasn't just about external changes, it was about the internal transformation. The reckoning with myself therapy became a weekly ritual, a space where I could unpack the pain, anger, and confusion that had been festering inside me. It wasn't easy confronting the ways I'd ignored my instincts, allowed myself to be manipulated, and prioritized someone else's happiness over my own. Was uncomfortable and raw, but it was necessary. Through therapy, I began to understand the patterns that had led me to Olivia and kept me tethered to her, even when I knew something was wrong. I learned to trust myself again, to listen to the voice inside me that I'd silenced for so long, and slowly I began to forgive. Not Olivia, but myself, for staying too long, for believing lies, for forgetting my own worth. Olivia, meanwhile, was a ghost on the periphery of my life. Her name popped up, occasionally in gossip or social media. But I paid little attention. I knew she was struggling to rebuild, taking odd jobs to pay off her debts and fulfill the terms of her plea deal, community service, financial restitution, and a tarnished reputation were her new reality. It was a far cry from the glamorous life she tried to steal. She reached out once, a single email that landed in my inbox. Late one night, the subject line read, "I'm sorry," I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to open it. When I finally did, the message inside was exactly what I expected. Aired apologies, justifications, and pleas for understanding. She wanted to explain, to make amends, to reconnect. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. Her words couldn't undo the damage she'd caused, and I had no interest in revisiting the past. My focus was on the future, a future that didn't include hair-own evening. As I sat on the newly refurbished patio, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos, it was all behind me now. What lay ahead was mine to shape, and for the first time in years, I felt capable of doing just that. This was my turning point, not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new one where I could stand tall and burdened and free to embrace whatever came next, with Olivia firmly in the past. I threw myself into the work of rebuilding my life. The process wasn't instant, nor was it without its setbacks. It was mine, a journey shaped by choices I finally felt confident enough to make for myself. Each day, I focused on reclaiming my independence brick by brick and rediscovering the man I had been before. Betrayal had knocked me down. The house was the first major project Olivia had left behind, a trail of things that no longer felt like mine. Furniture we'd chosen together, art she had insisted on buying, and the sterile decor she preferred. I decided to strip it all away. Every piece that reminded me of her was sold or donated, replaced by things that felt mine. The living room became warm and inviting, filled with bookshelves and a fireplace I'd always wanted. The bedroom shed its neutral palette, and bold, vibrant colors took their place, reflecting the confidence I was slowly rebuilding. It wasn't just about the physical changes, though. As I decorated, I found myself rediscovering passions I hadn't indulged in years. Music, for one. I dusted off my old guitar and spent evenings strumming away on the patio, letting the melodies fill the quiet spaces that used to feel oppressive. Cooking became another outlet, without Olivia's picky preferences dictating every meal. I found joy in experimenting with flavors and dishes that felt adventurous. And knew my professional life flourished as well. Freed from the emotional of Olivia's betrayal, I poured my energy into work with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Projects that had once seemed overwhelming now felt like challenges to conquer. I sought out new opportunities, tackled problems with a fresh perspective, and watched as my career soared to new heights. Promotions came quickly, along with the respect of colleagues who noticed the change in me, but perhaps the most profound transformation was in my relationships. Friends and family who had watched me endure the fallout of my marriage with quiet concern now rallied around me. Friday nights turned into regular dinners with old friends, filled with laughter and stories that reminded me of the bonds I'd neglected during my marriage. I spent Sundays with my parents, rekindling the easy warmth of family ties. Each interaction was a reminder that I was loved, supported, and not alone. As I had once felt, therapy remained a cornerstone of my healing. My sessions became less about unraveling the pain Olivia had caused, and more about understanding myself, my needs, my boundaries, and my aspirations. I learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to the voice inside me that I had silenced for far too long. Through this process, I realized that my independence wasn't just about being free from Olivia. It was about reclaiming my sense of worth and believing that I deserved a life filled with joy and authenticity. One of the most surprising changes came in my social circle. I found myself drawn to people who exuded positivity and strength, individuals who challenged me to grow rather than drain me of energy. Their influence was transformative, showing me that the company I kept was just as important as the life I built. These new friendships became a source of inspiration, reminding me of the possibilities that lay ahead. Even in moments of solitude, I found peace. The silence that had once felt suffocating now felt like a canvas, a space where I could reflect, dream, and plan for the future. I spent evenings on the patio, watching the sunset and feeling a deep gratitude for the journey I had undertaken. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. It was a scar, not a wound, and it reminded me of how far I'd come. Olivia, meanwhile, was little more than a footnote in my life occasionally. Her name would come up in conversation or social media, but I paid it no mind. She had tried reaching out once or twice, but I didn't respond. There was no need. My life was no longer tethered to hers, and I had no desire to revisit the past. My focus was firmly on the present, and the future. As the months turned into a year, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time hoped for: new beginnings, for unexpected adventures, and for a life that was truly my own. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was thriving, creating a life that felt richer and more meaningful than the one I had left behind. The process of rebuilding my independence taught me one simple truth: I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the fallout had tested me in ways I never imagined, but I had emerged on the other side with a renewed sense of purpose. This was my life, and for the first time in years, I felt fully in control of it. A year after Olivia's betrayal, I found myself standing at a crossroads, not in hesitation, but in reflection. The road I had traveled was long, filled with unexpected turns and challenges, but it had also brought me to a place of clarity and strength. What lay ahead was not a mystery. It was a blank canvas waiting for me to paint a picture that was entirely my own. I spent that morning on the patio, sipping coffee, as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the backyard. The once sterile and distant space had been formed into a haven. Flowers I had planted bloomed in bursts of vibrant color, and a small fountain trickled softly in the corner, its gentle sound bringing a sense of peace. It wasn't just a garden, it was a symbol of growth, a reflection of how far I had come. As I sat there, my mind drifted to everything that had led to this moment. Olivia's betrayal, as painful as it had been now, felt like a distant storm. It had come and gone, leaving destruction in its wake, but also clearing the way for something new. Her attempts to reconnect through emails, letters, and even a mutual acquaintance had dwindled over time. I had never responded, not because I held on to anger, but because I no longer saw the need. She was a chapter that had been closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. The changes I had made to my life were more than surface level. They were foundational. My career was thriving, and I had recently been offered leadership role I never would have considered before. The position came with challenges, but I welcomed them, confident in my ability to face whatever came my way. Work had become a source of fulfillment rather than a refuge, a place where I could grow and contribute meaningfully. My relationships, too, had deepened. Friends who had stood by but during the fallout remained my anchors. Their loyalty, a reminder of the importance of genuine connections. I had also made new friends, people who shared my values and inspired me to keep pushing forward, Even my family, whose quiet support had been a constant source of comfort, seemed to view me differently. They saw a version of me that was stronger, more assured, and unshakably determined. One of the most significant changes, though, was within myself. The therapy sessions, the introspection, and the hard conversations I had forced myself to have had all paid off. I trusted my instincts again, confident in my ability to make decisions that aired my values and boundaries. I no longer feared vulnerability, understanding that it was not a weakness but a strength. For the first time in years, I felt whole on a whim. I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood that afternoon. The streets were quiet, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. I passed familiar houses and unfamiliar faces each step, feeling lighter than the last. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't weighed down by what had been. I was fully present, fully alive that evening as the sun set in a blaze, orange and pink. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. It wasn't for Olivia, or anyone else for that matter. It was for me. A declaration of sorts, a reminder of everything I had learned and everything I had to look forward to. Dear James, I began, you've been through hell, but you've come out stronger. You've learned to let go of what doesn't serve you, to trust yourself, and to embrace the known. The future is yours, and it's filled with possibilities you never dared to dream of. Keep moving forward, keep growing. You deserve every bit of the happiness that's waiting for you. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, knowing I'd revisit it someday. For now, though I didn't need the reminder, I was living it. The night ended on a quiet note. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the patio, and watched the stars come out one by one. Each one felt like a promise, a tiny beacon of hope. The world was vast, and my place in it was no longer defined by someone else's actions or choices. It was defined by me. This wasn't just the start of a new chapter. It was the beginning of an entirely new story, one where I was the author, the protagonist, and the hero. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see where it would take me.